It is Talking Trash with Will Nash. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. And I am super excited to welcome today's guest. Michelle Dunn, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, Michelle is a specialist in green initiatives within the education system, which is very interesting to me. Now, how long have you been working in this line of work per se?
Well, I've been with Busch Systems for 15 years, but I've been specializing or working solely with schools for the last 6, I would say.
And here's the thing. Now, you are a mother, and you're comfortable sharing that with our audience today. And one of the things that I would think, especially working in the industry that you do, being a parent, is trying to figure out, or maybe trying to understand, the implementation of recycling in schools and the importance of it. Why do you think it's crucial to start teaching those recycling habits as early as kindergarten?
Well, I think those habits continue on as we get older, and kids are like sponges, and the earlier you teach them, then they're going to carry on that behavior as they grow. And so starting at home and starting in the school system as they get into JK or kindergarten, it's important. It's important that they first learn it at home and then they bring it into the school. And so having those programs that mirror what you do at home, it just further solidifies what they need to do as they get older.
Which is a very good point too. And when it comes to the sustainability part of the recycling in schools, I mean, when you're talking about someone who's in kindergarten, grade 1 or grade 2, how much understanding is there of sustainability and the importance in schools? Like, how are they teaching that? How are you even kind of stepping into the schools and implementing these programs?
I think every school is different, and it's really who is the driving force behind the program. So you've got, school systems that have just a parent that's very passionate about recycling and is going to say, I'm going to take on this job. Or you might have a teacher that essentially does a waste audit every single day because they bring the waste and recycling home daily and separate it themselves. And those are really small programs, but then you have school districts that are doing revamps of every school from elementary to junior to senior, all the way up to the end of high school, and that's their responsibility of keeping things consistent.
Oh, when you're teaching recycling in schools or you're implementing those programs that come up, how do you kind of expand the topic of sustainability to a broader community, right? So how, like, are the children understanding at such a young age? Like, again, we're talking kindergarten, we're talking grade 1, grade 2, or maybe a little bit older than that. Do they really understand the impact that they're having at that age? Or is it something that, we'll kind of get them into the recycling program, get them recycling, tell them, what goes in what bin, so to speak, and then later on they'll understand the impact that they're making long term?
Well, I think as they go to school, it's on the forefront. It's a thought process and a thinking pattern that starts from day one. So recycling is something that you talk about from day one, right from bringing your lunch to school. And as you can see, I don't know if people can see here, but I brought my lunch to this podcast.
Okay, so I love that Michelle actually brought her lunch to the podcast, number one. Number two, I'm a little jealous of your lunchbox, and we're going to talk later because I might have to buy that off you.
I thought you might be.
So, okay, as you can see, we have the beautiful dinosaurs on your blue lunchbox. Are we able to show what's inside of that? Can you explain what's going on there?
Sure. I mean, in Simcoe County, we have what's known as a boomerang program. So really what that does is teaches kids about waste reduction, and everything comes home with you. So what you bring to school in your lunch bag goes home with you. And as a parent, that's pretty important, because the last thing you want to do is send your child with a yogurt to school and they eat half of it, and then it gets put right back in your bag and spills all over, and then you have to deal with cleaning that up at home.
So is it a situation of, with this program, and obviously being a parent yourself locally, you know what that's all about, are they just encourage you, okay, you finish your little cup of Greek yogurt, go to the sink, rinse it out, and then are they bringing not the label, but the covering of at the top and the container as well? Or how does that work?
So I think the idea behind it and what you're supposed to encourage is, let's use reusable containers. So if you're going to send yogurt or you're going to send applesauce, then put it in a container that can be resealed and then brought it home, rinsed out, and then put back in your dishwasher.
Yeah. So now, you're not doing what I do is, 5 minutes before I need to leave the house in the minute, rip off that yogurt and throw it in my lunch bag.
No. And I think too, there's no in many schools, composting is a huge undertaking. And so they don't have compost programs, or they don't have haulers that are going to deal with that. So if you're bringing a banana peel, it's coming home. But if you have your child at age 4 or 5 responsible for emptying their own lunch bag, then they're going to understand that that banana peel at home goes into the compost. Or if you don't have a weekly pickup program, it goes into your waste.
So you're essentially having these habits that you're setting up at home, so when they're actually getting into the schools, even at a very, very young age, they know what to do. Or there's help that they can use when they're in the schools too.
Now, just opening up my lunch.
Yeah, what's for lunch today, Michelle?
Don't be jealous.
I think I might be.
I'm not so sure. We've got an orange.
Love oranges.
An avocado.
Avocado.
Some cucumbers in a reusable container. And a little package of hummus.
Which is going to be perfect to dip the cucumbers with,
Exactly.
right? That's going to be awesome. Now, do we have any, if we can find a lime, maybe a little bit of salt, some garlic. We can
I like where you're going with it.
We'll round up some Tostitos around here, and we'll just have a little guacamole party here.
That something tells me that kids won't be lining up to do any switcheroos with my lunch. They're not going to be offering to trade their fruit roll up with my avocado. So
I guess as a JK, in kindergarten, I wasn't liking avocados as much as I do now, right? Like it's a little bit different now.
It's evolved.
So I guess with this lunchbox, the idea is you cannot just rip something out of the fridge and throw it in the lunchbox in a lot of different communities. Yes, I know locally that's how we have it set up here, but I'm sure there's other markets that are the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, but it's going to come home with you.
Right.
And so the idea behind it is let's remove the waste containers from the classrooms. Let's remove, cans and bottles, and everything goes home with you. And then you learn to recycle at home. And then you have those bins in centralized areas. So you really have to think about, what are you collecting in a school? What's the most that you're seeing? Truthfully, it's likely paper.
Yeah.
Paper is a high, stream that they find that they're collecting. It's really important to have the proper placement of bins, especially in schools, even if you're just starting with one station in a high traffic area to educate the kids. And I think that's also, what's really important is, how are you going to educate the kids? How are you going to engage them and involve them? Because if they're not involved and if they don't care, then they're not going to take as much effort into learning about the program, how it's changing, and how to use it effectively. And I think that, since we went to school, not to certainly date us, but recycling has come a long way from, drawing that earth with the 3 arrows around it. And kids now have options of green teams. And a school trip could be going to the landfill. I know they do that in Simcoe County. And as much as people think, oh God, the landfill, but it's important. And my daughter is in grade 8, and she's just, one of her tasks or her projects this year was to develop a sustainable city. And there's a lot of thinking behind that. And if you don't have teachers that are passionate about it, that are going to introduce these subjects in the classroom, then it's not going to become a thought process of the child that's learning. And then they won't carry that behavior onto the next school and the next one as they grow.
Well, and the interesting thing to me is, since I've started working at Busch Systems, and I've learned a lot since I've been here, obviously about the recycling and recycling programs and waste management, but almost the bigger picture, and I notice when I'm out in public, is how many different organizations are now obviously promoting and aware when it comes to sustainability and the different programs that are out there, where maybe, I don't know if I would have noticed it as much, like we're not working here, but I find it fascinating. And obviously I'm sure there's moments where you have to, especially with the younger grade school students, or even when they're in, early high school, like grade 9 or grade 10, get that information there. But how can they make it fun so that the students actually want to take part in these programs or in these environmental and recycling initiatives? Any examples that you've seen?
I mean, I've seen certainly green teams in schools and students stickering the bins and getting them involved and putting the containers out themselves. I've seen contests where who's going to come up with the most creative and successful design for a sign.
Right.
Because it's really important to keep things consistent with, color and signage, restrictive openings. And if you get the students involved from day one and taking pride in labeling those bins and putting the signs in them, then they're going to take pride throughout their school and continue to learn and develop with the recycling program. I also think, superheroes are a big thing these days.
Absolutely.
And if you make, a recycling hero that kids can look up to, and maybe it's Recycle Man versus Trash Man. I don't know, like the next Marvel movie, like we just created the next blockbuster hit. I don't know.
I love it. I mean, grown adults like us want to be heroes and superheroes, let alone when you're going through grade school and high school. Who doesn't want to put on that cape and say, I'm the recycling hero of the day, right? That's what makes it fun. We're talking about a lot of the positive things with these initiatives, recycling programs in the school system, specifically JK to grade 12. What are some of the challenges, or has there ever been a situation where maybe you've had that pushback of, oh, we don't have time for all of this detail or all this information? Like, what are some of the things that you face, especially with your role?
I think at every age there's going to be challenges. We see it in the workplace. We see it in our recreational, like our gyms and our, arenas and stadiums and things like that. And it's certainly going to happen at the education level, when you're dealing with kids, because kids are kids, but you're also dealing with admin and staff, and people don't like change.
No.
And so programs are constantly changing. I mean, we just changed ours here at work and completely had to be re-educated in what goes in which bin. And so education behind it is key. You always have to continue to educate the kids and the staff. And then you're thrown things like COVID. And that changed it once again. And all of a sudden, custodial and facility staff were, hey, I'm not going into someone's personal space in their office and going to clean out their bin. You're now responsible for doing that. Or kids, you are now responsible for taking out your classroom waste into the hallway and dumping it. And then they've got to take part in that, and they've got to, be proud of their school and basically their second home. And how are they going to make it better? And the way to do that is to take part, to learn, to educate yourself, and to help it grow.
And it's funny, you talk about growing, you talk about awareness, you talk about the attitude towards recycling and just, doing good for the environment, right? Is like, you've been with Busch Systems for a while, have you seen the change gravitate more towards the positive and people being more open than maybe the doors that you might have faced maybe earlier on in your time in your position here?
I mean, I think the conversations and people talking about it, and the blogs that you see now, and the programs, and people want to talk about recycling. They want to make this world a better place. And so jobs are created for it. You would never have, 25 years ago, a sustainability advisor. People wouldn't even know what that was. And then today, you can get your master's in sustainability and, focusing specifically on, this environmental factor. It's always changing, it's always growing. And that's one thing I think that it's always going to continue now to evolve in the school system. And it has to start when you're 4 or 5 or when you're entering, because it's a learned behavior and it's a pattern. And if you learned to not pay attention and you learn to not care, then you never will as you get older.
It's absolutely, it makes sense to me. Like, I know it might sound so simple, but it makes sense, and it's not as simple, I think, as it really sounds. Not. And sometimes I would think that you would need to reach out to some of those resources outside of the schools to really help you implement these programs and even these events that happen within the schools. What are some maybe suggestions that you might have for schools who, okay, you know what, maybe we don't have a budget for some of these things to be implemented, like we might need some maybe local nonprofit groups or community groups. How can you kind of reach out and make that contact, and hoping that you might have some help from outside sources? Like, that's something that could help you?
Well, I think that you can always try to attempt a program. You can take any bin. You can take a cardboard box, and if you don't have the budget but you engage students, educate them, and create signage, then you can all of a sudden create a recycling station. It's really important to know your laws in your city. So you have to be mindful of what's collected in each stream, so that if you have a passionate parent, even a passionate student, maybe it'll be someone that takes it upon themselves to say, hey, we don't have a program. Let's see how much waste and recycling we actually generate, and let's collect it ourselves. And maybe that's all of a sudden a project that, like the science fair that we used to have, Duracell versus Energizer.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too. I love this conversation when it comes to, someone who's maybe in high school, for example, who is passionate about the environment, will be taking that program in university in the sustainability sector, right? We had someone on a previous podcast, Zoe from Youth for Lake Simcoe, and she was that girl. Like, she was the one who was like, she's gathering up her friends, starting up a local community organization, and really spearheading things that are happening, at her waterfront, preserving her wildlife. So there are those. Sometimes, kids get a bad rap, right?
Yeah.
But I think we have to remember that there are a lot of people who are passionate about the environment, passionate about, composting and recycling and just doing good, like kind of bringing people together and doing those positive things that make people not only do good things, but feel good.
Yeah, feel good. And I think there's always, you see a lot of programs that are in post-secondary schools with textiles. I mean, you certainly don't see that in the public school system, and at least not here. And maybe in other regions you would, but that's another thing, like collecting, clothing that people are getting rid of, and then how can we upcycle that? And it's still a part of recycling. Yes, it's not your cans and bottles and your compost and your paper, but there's forms of recycling and reuse everywhere. You just have to look around and be mindful and pay attention.
And you know what? You kind of touched upon something there, post-secondary. So I think what we're going to have to do, Michelle, is I think that we're going to have to wrap it up today on Talking Trash. I'm going to have you back for a part 2 where we talk about what's the difference, once you are grade 12 and you're graduating, you're going off to college or university, how does it look different when you've entered that post-secondary world? Because I think you might have a few tips, and I think you might have a few ideas. Will you come back?
Sounds great to me.
Michelle Dunn, of course, specialist in green initiatives within the education system here at Busch Systems. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. Thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for being a part of Talking Trash with Will Nash.